So I'm Leslie Osborn. Thank you, Doug, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I did teach an undergraduate course here, which was great fun. I really enjoyed it, Psych 180, and I'm glad to be back just talking in the seminar. Okay, so love and business. So that's not a common concept or a conversation in most business places today. And I'm assuming that if you're in the room, you have an interest in it, and I have a very deep interest in it. I believe that love is a very under-recognized source of energy in today's businesses, and it's a shame because we really need all the sources of energy that we can get for what's going on in the marketplace right now. We're going to talk about why this is important today, both to individuals and to places of work. So my story is that I've been a manager in Fortune 500 corporations for about 25 years, most recently at Microsoft. I was there for about 11 years. And so I've seen various types of workplaces that welcome and support love, and we'll even talk about it in those terms, and then other workplaces or groups that really don't want to hear about or know about love, certainly don't want to talk about it, don't want to use the word, and love has been basically driven underground, very deeply underground in those places of work. And obviously I'm in support of the former. I think that we miss a bet when we don't take all of our human emotions into considerations in our organizations. So about 5 years ago, I took a hard right turn from line management and leadership into organization development, which of course is a discipline and a professional discipline that cares a lot about making workplaces safe for the human heart. And in the process of doing that, I wrote a master's thesis. And when I told my thesis advisor that I wanted to write something about how love works in organizations, he wasn't too pleased. It wasn't the typical empirical project that he wanted to supervise. But in the process of doing it, I think he learned some things, and I certainly learned some things. And what I did, and I'll be talking about that a little bit in this conversation today, is I talked to organization development practitioners whose whole business is to work with a variety of companies and organizations, and so they're intimately involved in these companies' lives, in the projects that they do. And they see a lot. They see a lot of the dynamics, the strategic dynamics, the organizational people dynamics. And I thought, well, it would be great to talk to these folks about what they see. What does love look like in corporations? In American corporations was my focus. How prevalent is it? What sorts of human interactions is love made up of? And so I asked them that. And we'll come back to that research, and I have a number of stories for you that we'll pull out of that. Love is a source of incredible energy in organizations, and I'm going to quote John Mackey. There's been a little bit of a blip in terms of what's being written and said about this, and if you go on YouTube today, you'll find John Mackey. He's the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods, and he will talk about love. He will talk about it very directly, and what he'll say is that there is nothing as powerful as the culture that love and care creates in organizations. And he espouses that for his own company, and he is on the road now talking about it to others. And that's a pretty unusual thing to see a CEO out there talking about love that directly. So what's right with this picture? That's what I want to know. We know, I'm being a little bit facetious here because I see a lot of love in organizations and lots of loving things, but what we tend not to do is we tend not to talk about it. It's very underground. When we go into a workplace, most of us will split off. And I'm talking particularly corporate workplaces here. Most of us will split because that's the expectation. So we'll split off from our deeper, more loving, more connected selves, and we'll separate that out because we think that it's not appropriate to bring that self to work. Most corporations support that. There are exceptions. But in our Western business culture, that's the typical mode. So we tend to leave our loving selves at home. We certainly leave the language at home. And we go underground. We do connect and we do support each other on teams, but typically we call that other things. So we might call it engagement, we might call it caring, we might call it support, those types of things. Rarely will we go down to the level of calling it love. And yet many people in organizations yearn for more connection. And I've certainly seen this, and I'm guessing all of you in the audience have too, is that, depending on where you find yourselves as a place of work, if that support and that atmosphere isn't there, to support you as a full human being, there's something missing. And it may never be talked about, that thing that's missing, but it's missing and we can feel it. And most of us, unfortunately and sadly, resign ourselves to that. And we just think, well, this is what it's like to be working in corporate America, and this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'll just suck it up. And that's the way that most people go. And yet what winds up happening is nobody gets to learn who we are, the real us. And that's why these people up here have question marks in front of their faces, and we don't really know who's working side by side with us. We don't know who's working at the next desk. So this lady is the Willendorf goddess, that's her name. She goes back to 2500 BC. She's one of the very earliest sculptures that depicts and epitomizes love and our need for love as a human species. And she was found in Austria in 1906. And the point here is that very recently, there's been a lot of research and there's been a lot of scientific work done. Umberto Maturana happens to be a very well-known, revered, really, Chilean biologist who has done a lot of work in understanding our human origins, and he actually has a great book out called The Origin of Humanness and the Biology of Love. And it talks about and illustrates how we are built as human animals, how we're built as a species, and that the deep core need for relational, not sexual so much, but that's just built in, but the deep core need for relational love and how pervasive that is in our lives. Again, something that we modern people in the complexity of our modern society, we tend to wall off from for a lot of reasons. But if you go back to prehistory, early family, tribal, early community, you get closer into touch with this. And if you go into more indigenous communities right now, they're very in touch with this. And so the Willendorf goddess is an example of that core need to connect in a relational way. And when we don't have that connection, what happens is that we tend to not feel safe. And this is in all spheres of life, not only out of the workplace, but in. This may sound strange to you because we tend not to think of it. But if you're really honest and you go deep inside yourself and feel it, in all spheres of life, we're looking for relational connection. And when we don't have it, we go underground and we close off. If we sense that things aren't safe, we don't trust. We have fear. And those things close off exactly the things that corporate America wants from its employees: productivity, risk-taking, creativity, trust, deep teamwork, all of those types of things. Okay. A large part of what we need in the relational sense is simply seeing and being seen and accepted. And when you scrape it all away, that's a lot of what comes down to. So in the workplace, I tend to think of love as showing up in 4 spheres, and these are them. First of all, if you can't love yourself, that's a baseline problem. And there are plenty of people in the workplace who struggle just with that. I don't mean to call it the workplace, plenty of people everywhere in our culture who struggle simply with loving themselves. And if you don't have that capability at some level, it's going to be very difficult to have love to give. In this sense, I should caveat that I'm talking about altruistic love here, not sexual or romantic love. That is not the topic of this talk. I think you guys probably knew that coming in, but I'll just clarify. So self-love, very confident woman. You could imagine that she's got a pretty good self-image of herself. And then the next place is love of others or another. So in the workplace, obviously, at home we love our families and we love our good close friends. But in the workplace, there's lots of opportunity to love others. And so it could be the love of a mentor for a mentee. It could be love of a supervisor for an employee. It could be love between team members who have worked together side by side, perhaps gone through some very stressful or exciting or trying projects and been there for each other. And this happens all the time in the workplace. When you get to a point where you feel that what you're experiencing is deeper than perhaps the day-to-day, and it could be something that could be called love. And then the third and the fourth areas, and so the third area is really loving your work as a craft. So this could as easily be a software coder or a nuclear physicist. It doesn't matter. It's the concept of loving your work as a craft And that sort of care and patience and passion that I'm sure that individual puts into making his violins. So that's sort of deep. And what that is in all of these cases loving something bigger than ourselves. And work is one of the primary places that we get to experience that, if we've typed our work well in terms of our own needs. So our work and just loving, so being in flow in regard to work, you know, the whole concept of flow and just time changing and intense focus and really joy in many ways in what you're doing. And then we have here mission, and a lot of people are in there. First, some people join companies for the mission of the company. I think in the past, we accepted the idea of companies are there to make a product or deliver a service and make some money, and that was enough. But increasingly, things are changing, and I think on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how things are changing. But increasingly, people who come to work want a mission or a purpose for that business that they can sign on to in a space of love. So a deep connection to that mission. They want something going on there to be of service to the world, of service to the human species, the ecosystem, the planet, something, or all of the above, which more and more companies are actually going for the triple or quadruple bottom line. And that's something that you can love, where it's much harder to love a P&L statement. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in the market. So certainly from my time in organizations and experiences at Microsoft and other companies, I had a publishing career before that, and a lot has happened in the publishing market. You know, companies have been turned upended in terms of their strategy, their way of publishing. Of course, the web has affected things profoundly. So much has changed. So what's going on out in the world? And I believe that we are at a huge inflection point. Lots and lots of things are changing. And businesses are understandably scared and very confused at what to do. We are in a period of constant change, driven by technological change and by the web creating global markets. Strategies, many tried and true business strategies, because of the web and because of technological influence, are no longer viable in the marketplace. So if you look at the media companies, for a long time, they kind of knew something was happening. They're kind of a little bit worried about, this or that, web upstart, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the rug is pulled out from under them. And they really are scrambling for completely new business models that they did not have, and in many cases don't have. And all of that infrastructure and all of those assumptions about the P&L on how it loads up and et cetera, are all out the window. And that's happening in industry after industry after industry after industry. So technical, market, and strategic change. There is a new generation of talent. So we right now have about 3 or 4 generations still in the workplace. I'm a baby boomer. We still have people a little bit in the generation before me, and then a couple of generations after, so Generation Y, the millennials. They're all now in the workplace, and they're all looking for very different things. Came up differently, were socialized differently. The millennials in particular are an interesting generation because they are the folks who are crying for purpose and meaning in their work lives. The rug has been ripped out from under them in terms of any of the financial and safety, security deals that their parents may have had in the workplace. There are no pensions to speak of anymore. Who knows what's going on with stocks? It's questionable if buying a house is the right thing to do anymore. The benefits that wealthy, well-off companies were able to provide are now less and less available. So all of these things, and so people in that generation in particular are increasingly seeing themselves as free agents. And they're going from company to company to company, running their own careers, acting as independent operators, and there's no sign that this is going to go away anytime soon. And so the fundamental deal between businesses and these workers has been broken. And what they're now looking for, and I've got Dan Pink's Whole New Mind up here, and Drive is his other book, which is really relevant to this conversation. But what those people are looking for is, at work, if you go with what Pink is saying, is they're looking for purpose in their work. They're looking for mastery in their work. So this ability to be a craftsperson or to scale your own skill sets. And they're looking for autonomy. They don't believe anymore that anybody's going to take care of them. They know they're going to have to do it themselves. And so this changes the whole deal with companies. So companies are going to have to talk differently to those people. And they're going to have to talk in terms of love, because that's a lot of what people are looking for. They won't say it, they won't use the word, but that's what they're looking for. They're looking for enough recognition of me and my capabilities and my validity as a human individual that the deal is going to be fair. Emotional connection equals discretionary effort. And I think there's all kinds of books on this right now and studies. So we know that if you just have your regular workforce, that's why engagement as a topic has been so big lately. It's like everyone knows that, and God knows, having been in workplaces and watched the various approaches of people around me to the workplace, you can tell who's highly engaged and you can tell who's not. And you can tell the productivity is very, very different. And so increasingly, at Microsoft, I know that this is a fact, that the top 20% of the employees outperform by such a degree the remainder of the employees. That's where they're shooting. They want to keep those heavy hitter producers in the company. And the rest, it doesn't matter that much. The bottom 10% are out the door. The middle 10%, great, but if we can upgrade them to operate like the top 20% who are highly engaged, that's what we want to do, because the performance, the outperform is so much greater. So emotional connection equals discretionary effort. And then all of a sudden we're talking about IQ and EQ, and we're seeing that women are making huge inroads in the workplace. There are now more women PhDs, I think, than there ever were before. I think they outnumber men at this point, 50-50 in senior management at this point. So it's really changing rapidly. And we know that women tend to, for whatever reason, be more open to the emotional aspects of work, more cognizant and more accepting that they're real and important. So there was a corporate leadership council study that indicated that leaders who can engage their employees at the emotional level versus the rational level, the output is 400% greater, which is a shocking statistic. This was a study of, I think it was 500,000 people in 59 different companies. So it's a fairly broad study, large study. And it just proves what we intuitively know. Some companies are getting the message, certainly, and I think as we look at the literature, we read the blogs and read Fast Company and other, Strategy Plus Business. Those are good sources to see what's actually going on kind of at the cutting edge of business. So I'll just cite three: Google, Whole Foods, and DaVita. And DaVita, for everybody knows who Google and Whole Foods are. For those of you who don't know DaVita, it's an exceptional company in terms of its sensibilities and its approach to both its business customers and its employees internally. And they are a kidney dialysis company. And that's their business. So they are in the healthcare field and they do kidney dialysis work. So Google, one of the interesting things about Google is that in their internal screening of employees, they're looking for emotional intelligence, and they say this in their material. And they're looking for people who can connect with other people and create strong teams. And so there's a relational muscle that they're looking for. And they put it right in their material as far as their screening of their employees, which is fascinating. And they do a lot of other things too. These are just two of many, many things that make Google interesting and relatively unique. But that emphasis on the relational capability as policy, I found striking. And then Whole Foods, very similar. Again, it's John Mackay's company, and he talks a lot about the importance of creating a culture of care and love. And he talks about the work that leaders have to do to model that culture and to model those values and those energies and how they set the tone for that. And he is a strong supporter of evaluating for promotion based on EQ, so emotional intelligence. Do you have it? Are you able to deploy it in your work and bring that to the company, among other things? So again, another, on paper, strong policy for that. And then DaVita, I've already talked about their strong service orientation, but also in their values, they talk about care for the customer, no surprise, and they talk about care for each other. And that is a surprise, because you don't get a lot of companies that write in their value statements that one of their deep core institutional values is that they're going to care for each other. Usually they stop short of that. Okay, so a couple of stories that I wanted to share with you from the research that I did. I'll tell you a little bit about that research first. So I talked to organization development practitioners, as I mentioned, and I wound up interviewing them and I asked them for examples of love that they'd seen kind of on the hoof in client systems that they've worked with. And I wound up getting 92 different examples of little vignettes, little stories that they told me that they said, yeah, when you mention love, I think of this time when, and then they would go off into some memory of a situation with a client that they thought of as love. And sometimes these were situations that you might characterize as, well, that's caring, or that's service orientation or support or empathy. So you might put other words on it. But something about the situation went beyond that for these organization development practitioners, and they labeled it love. And I found that very interesting, because what makes something go beyond caring into love? That's a charged term in our world, in our culture. And so what is it that makes you elevate it to that level? So I'm going to come back to that. But first I'm going to just read, and because I want to read, and I don't normally read in presentations, but I want to read because it's their words. I mean, stories are data with a soul in many ways. And for qualitative researchers, that's what's important. And so it's their words that are important. So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs of things that these folks thought were love when we talked about it from their experiences. So this one I call Deeply, Madly in Love. Well, an example is my friend's company, where I think there's tremendous love, and I think it has to do with who he is as a leader. He's deeply, madly in love with what he does, and he's deeply, madly in love with people, and with people who are good at what they do. You would feel and see excitement and warmth and tremendous passion, both love for the work and for the people. Something about how he shows up, and then what he tolerates of the people he works with. When it's called for, he puts people in their place, but he has a very delicate way of doing it. So that was an example. And what's interesting about that one is, I have many other examples, obviously, and there is a theme of management with love being a type of management that is not unwilling to call out issues, quite willing to step in and call out issues, but does it in a supportive and non-judgmental way. And that's so important to people in terms of how they don't feel acknowledged and seen. They don't feel wiped out. The typical command and control business cultures, certainly some of the ones I've worked in, are much more critical cultures. And that's very accepted. As a matter of fact, it's often seen as a plus to be critical and to call it straight and not shy away from self-criticism, which can easily turn into other criticism. But this was an example of a guy who passionate about the work and very careful in how he treated people. Okay, another story, incapacitated founder. The CEO has had a stroke, and he's somewhat incapacitated. No vision in his right eye, and his body doesn't work well. So the acting CEO, who's the chief operations officer, he has no guile, apparently no guile at all. He's not trying to take over the company. He's not trying to form it in his own image. But he's younger, more energetic, and he's got a good sense of what it takes to make the jump to expand. So he's helping people be more focused. He's helping hold them accountable. But all his communications are wrapped around the founder's vision, helping people realize what the founder wants the company to be. It's very selfless. He never toots his own horn. He's never in there demanding more money. So the idea of just selfless, sacrificial, deep, committed support. And the last one, this one is called Departing Coworker. I can think of an example of being in a monthly meeting with a group of people who were individual sales producers in a financial services company. We were going through a kind of a monthly check-in and an exercise to follow that. And one guy, he decided to leave the group. He was in financial straits, not good results, struggling mightily to get it done, trying hard, just not getting it, not getting the output. He decided to begin a job search and to look for another position. Toward the end of the meeting, as he was talking about his situation, he said, "I don't know if you guys want me to continue coming to this meeting since I'm on my way out." And people overwhelmingly said, "You better come here. We need to hold you accountable for finding a new job. So I think it was a real act of caring and generosity, because they weren't going to benefit directly from him being there, but they had a meaningful connection with him. And they wanted to make sure they were able to support him in making a successful transition into something else. So again, absolutely nothing in it for the people other than the relational connection, but an acknowledgement of you're important, you're a real person, you're every bit as important as we are, in the system or out of it. And this OD practitioner said, yeah, he felt that that was love. So really simple examples. This is not mysterious stuff. Well, it is in a way, but it's not complicated stuff. So just some stories. There are 92 of them, and those are 3 examples. So to summarize that piece, what does love in business look like? Well, from my research, and admittedly, this is just a very small study. I mean, I'm sure what was interesting is there are not a lot of quantitative studies out there in any way on this topic, mostly qualitative and very few. But in any case, in my research, I actually identified 6 disparate, distinct categories, 2 of which accounted for 81% of the results. And the first one was support, sacrifice, and service, and we've heard a little bit about that. Over half of the stories had to do with support, sacrifice, and service. A large percentage had to do with authentic communication, which is being seen and heard. And that can happen in a large group setting, in a cross-organizational event type setting, smaller groups, team level, or one-on-one. 27% there. And then I put in a smaller third category, love for the worker mission, because I thought it was an important category, even though it didn't have as much in the way of percentage. So that's what it looks like. And again, these things come in very simple vignettes. I asked, of course, about impact, knowing that I couldn't really prove anything. And nothing I've read in the literature, and I did an exhaustive literature review study for this, proved anything. It's kind of ironic that you go on faith with this topic. You can't prove empirically that the existence of love in a corporate setting or an organization translates into bottom line ROI. Hasn't been done. Perhaps at some point we'll have instruments that enable us to do that, but we don't have them yet. So I just asked because I was interested in what I'd hear. And what people came up with were these sorts of impacts. So, and they're actually quite interesting. So when love exists in organizations, people relate that to improved relationships, of course, higher trust, no surprise, connection and loyalty. And then personal engagement and commitment to the work. So this is that engagement piece that we've been talking about. Finding meaning, providing meaning at work. Supporting a positive climate. Very, very important. A little bit on bottom line impact on production or performance. And then some other things, loyalty to leader if the leader is perceived as a particularly loving, accepting leader. And a few other things. And there were more than this, but these were kind of the more interesting ones. So people do see impact. They do relate it when you ask them. They do say, yeah, I see this coming out of it. But empirically, it's a tough argument to make. What's interesting about it, too, though, is if you think about the way that we think about organizational effectiveness, and most of the studies that are out there on impact, they're all financial. Their bottom line impact, their ROI impact, their P&L impact. Where this comes into play is that climate, creating the climate and creating the culture in which people want to be. And these are communities. You know, these are anthills, these organizations, they're communities. And the pheromones of that organization get out among the populace, and people know, is it a loving organization or is it not? Again, maybe never using the word, but they know. Is this an organization that respects employees, customers, stakeholders, or is it not? You know, how do the leaders comport themselves? What are they modeling? It all gets out. And so I think these things are important. And as we begin to change our definitions of organizations and organizational success with the triple bottom line and the quadruple bottom line, and we start to think in terms of broader stakeholders, the earth, communities, you know, broaden out from just the financial results, I think that being able to engage and retain employees is huge. So the question of how does love relate to fear or vice versa, most of the people that I talked to felt that they were opposites, that they had an inverse relationship, and that when you have a lot of fear in an organization, Love can help drive that out. And when you have a lot of fear in an organization, it drives love out, either way. So this equation, basically, I stole this from a guy named Brady Wilson who wrote a great book called Love at Work. And in your packet, he's in the bibliography and suggested readings, so you have that site. But this is his formula, and it's basically performance equals. And so what do we think performance equals typically? Well, we usually think it equals, individual performance, talent, right? You've got to have some talent for whatever you're doing. Energy, you can have a lot of talent, but if you don't have any energy to turn it into something, that's not helpful. And knowledge. So if you have, talent, energy, and knowledge, you ought to be able to get some performance out of that person, right? But then you've got this denominator, which is interference. Interference is the thing that reduces performance in organizational settings. And interference can often come in the form of fear, or it can come in the form of feeling disrespected, or lack of trust of your management chain, or cynicism, negativity, those types of things. And to the degree that this is big, you're reducing everything that you could have gotten, right? Because people won't do it. They won't stick their necks out, and they won't be creative, and they won't partner in strange ways, and they won't suggest new forms of organization or structures or processes. They just won't do it. They won't stay that extra 2 hours, and they won't think about it in the bathtub. I mean, all of this discretionary effort. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be worrying about this kind of stuff. And so loving organizations also have the capacity to reduce fear, which is critical to performance. Let's talk about what's obvious, which is why don't we talk about love in organizations? Well, basically because it's taboo. We don't talk about it because we don't talk about it. And most companies, you wouldn't even ask that. You go, well, of course, let's move on. There are a lot of reasons that we don't, and some very good ones. Mostly it comes down to vulnerability. So if I'm going to go into an organization and even think about love, first of all, you have to be willing to be present to yourself enough to think about that. To admit, it took me a long time to admit that I might actually be looking for love at work. I mean, that's a little bit startling to think about. Like, wow, I might actually be going to work today on the subway in Washington, D.C., which was a whole phase I had, looking for love. Not romantic love, but acceptance, acknowledgement. And it's something that people don't think about a lot. And certainly in our Western business cultures, it's not supported. Using the word is very confusing because we only have the one word. And so you have to unhook this whole idea of sexual and romantic love from altruistic love or passionate love about work or what you're doing, the mission and all of that. You have to unhook those two things, and we have no precedent for that. They're just completely tied up together. And so the minute that you mention love in a workplace, that other one comes in. It gets very confusing. And so mostly we don't mention it at all. And by not mentioning it and leaving it off the table, we lose all the power. We just leave all that power. As Roger is saying here, he's a friend and a great thinker and has been passionate about this topic for a long time. I mean, we just lose the power and the creativity that we could tap. So lots of reasons we don't. It's dangerous if you misjudge your management chain. You could be seen as soft. You could be seen as woo-woo. Lots of opportunity to misunderstand here. And yet, is there something in using the word that brings us to a different place where more things are possible? I got very curious about that. And my jury is still a little bit out. I do come out of the business world, so my balancing scale is constantly going like this on whether to use the word. I use it here with you. I do use it in corporations as well, but I have to know my audience. It's a real easy way to get people confused, and I don't want them to miss the message. I'm going to talk just briefly before we end, there's about 3 more slides, about power and love, because it's very important to think about them together. So businesses are all about power, right? Power to get stuff done, power to do more collectively than we could individually, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Businesses make it possible to get things done in the world that we really need as humans that we couldn't get done in any other way. So here's Martin Luther King, a very astute observer of humanity. And he's talking about power and love. And what he says is power without love is abusive, and love without power can be sentimental and anemic. And that applies as much in business as to social movements. And so when you think about it, you do need both. And it's really interesting because when you have both, they begin to bleed into each other at a certain level. Adam Kahane, who you may not know, but he's a well-known, what to call him, activist, I guess, in reconciliation, truth and reconciliation work in particular in South Africa, but also in other areas. He wrote a book called Power and Love, and he made this argument very clearly, and I recommend it. But in any case, there's a way to look at it. So balancing power and love, what I have here is a polarity map. This is called a polarity map. And it's a very useful way to look at tensions within organizations that people tend to try to solve as problems, but they really can't be solved as problems. They have to be solved as tensions. They have to be worked as polarities. And so I'll show you what I mean. So here we have power and love. And the whole left side with these two quadrants is power. And the right side is love. And we're setting them up together, and we're showing the negative aspect, the degenerative aspects of both down here, and the generative aspects of both up here. You put them all together and you get a polarity map. And what happens is when you realize you're living in a polarity, and this can be true of all sorts of oppositional tensions, usually you say, well, we have a problem. And the problem usually starts down here because you're experiencing more than you want of one of the negative aspects of these energies. So for example, we're experiencing a negative aspect of love. Well, let's start over here, power, it's easier. Okay, we're experiencing way too much crazy power in this organization, right? Don't work well together, lots of warring teams. It's manipulative, it's abusive. This is when consultants like me get called in. Like, we have problems in the organization, right? People aren't connecting, we've got a lot of resistance, and yet we have big business goals. How do we get this organization pulling together to address these business goals and these marketplace challenges? So they realize, oh, maybe we better go towards like a little bit more of a loving, caring, connected, collaborative mode. So you try to run away from the downside, the degenerative side, right, of power, and you think, let's go towards the upside, the generative side of its opposite, which is love. Let's run up here. Let's call in the consultants and figure out how we get in more, collaboration, trust, energy, engagement, all this stuff. Great. And then you live up here for a while, and you're like, wow, not sure that's working either. As a matter of fact, it's been 3 years we've been on this thing about trust, and we're really tired of it. We need to get back to brass tacks. And because we're also experiencing some of the negative sides of love. And the energy tends to drop. It's just natural process. It's just very natural process. And it drops into the negative side of this pole. Love can be sentimental and anemic. We have too much of it around. We're not getting stuff done. Nobody's accountable for anything. People are just too nice. They're not self-realizing their power and their potential. So then you're like, okay, we're in this place. We actually better go back over here. Let's go to the positive side of power. We need some of this stuff. All the good things. We need to get stuff done. We need to have focus, da-da-da-da. And so this is an infinity loop, right? I mean, this is never going to end. As long as people manage it as a problem and not a polarity, it's never going to end. What you want to do when you have one of these is you want to manage very consciously with the map, and you want to say, let's do what we can to catch it quickly and keep ourselves in these upper two quadrants as much as we can. And so that's the solution, and you can do, but you won't get to that solution if you don't think about it consciously. And so I just wanted to offer that as a way to think about power and love, because you do need both. There is no bad guy here. It's all the balance, And companies, businesses absolutely need both. Can't leave either one off the table. Here's my list of, I thought about making 10, but I really only had 9, so that's what we have. 9 reasons we need love in business. It's the unlocking the engagement. First of all, it is who we are at our core. 25,000 BC, it's who we were, and it's still who we are. The whole issue about fear, the passion in work, the mastery, being able to see you and you see me. I want to say one other thing about that. I believe, and this is just my kind of editorial comment, that when I've witnessed love in organizations, and I have, and some of the research that I did tracks with this, some of my conversations with the participants in my research, love is something that it's deeper than your everyday caring and affection. It's deeper, and it's such a qualitative experience. It's a felt experience. And what happens in a room where love is present is all of a sudden, to me, whatever that interaction is, and it can be with people, it can be again with a work or a mission, but something happens where the felt experience of that drops a level or 2 or 10. And you drop out of the ordinary. And this has happened a lot in offsites that I've conducted or been part of, where people have they've just engaged in a way that the space opened, the energy in the room opened up, and they dropped in, and all of a sudden the business problem fell away, the issues, the tensions fell away, and they got to a place of connection in a deeper universal place of humanity. And I think that that is an opening for love, and it happens in business, and it happens when things slow down. It's very hard right now in business today to get things to slow down enough to reach that, to touch that. But I think that that is a very common way that love opens. And you're never the same after that. Once you've experienced that with someone or your coworkers or a room, that group's never the same. You can go back to the issues, you can fight it out and duke it out and all of that stuff, but something has happened there where you've touched something that's more universal. To me, that's a piece of love. And some people, and here I'm getting on very shaky ground, will explain that as a human experience that they call spirit. Some people will call that spirit. And I'm not terrifically spiritual in that sense, so I tend not to go there, but I acknowledge it. I think there's some connection there in how we view our world and how we explain those things. So here's the bottom line. This is from Rodney Ferris, who actually wrote in the 90s about love. It's amazing what's been written about love that nobody knows about, all in the context of work and organizations. And I think he's got a lot of wisdom here. Push authoritatively and you will get only a piece of what you want. Love and you'll get more than you could ever have dreamed possible. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I think it's important to be curious and to talk about it. And that is it. Thank you very much.